Start with that introduction again. Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Virginia Legislative Roundtable. I'm Deb Wake, the president, and we are so happy to have you with us this morning. A little follow-up from last week when we talked about SJ1 and HJ9, which is a constitutional amendment to secure voting rights in our Constitution, and then automatically restore those if you're a citizen returning from a felony conviction and served your time. Passed right out of the Senate committee yesterday. We didn't have an opportunity to testify in support, but we had a lot of support for that. So excited about that. So the advocacy for that moves to the House. This morning, we are focusing on the witness requirement removal. And just to, that's for the absentee ballots. The League successfully, Mary, you need to mute, please. The League successfully litigated the requirements so that during a pandemic that was waived. We felt that people shouldn't have to risk their health in order to cast a ballot. And so we are so delighted that we were able to offer those protections for voters. And now the measure is before the legislature to permanently remove that barrier from voters trying to cast an absentee ballot. So with us this morning is Susan Lydick with REVUp Virginia. And Susan, will you please tell us a little bit about your organization and your advocacy, please? Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Susan Lydick, and just a little bit about myself. I've pretty much been a community volunteer most of my adult life, a lot of that being around disability issues. And because of family members and friends that had disabilities, starting with my brother, who was 8 years older than myself, born with cleft palate and hair lip, I really have had disabilities at the forefront of my mind for my entire life. I had done volunteer work and advocacy on the individual level most of my life. And then late in life, I got my PhD in rehabilitation science from George Mason University in 2016, because I really wanted to understand more about the processes of how people truly do become independent and adapt to their disabilities and understand those who don't adapt and what are the barriers for people adapting to their disabilities. I was very fortunate to meet Helena Berger, who was the previous CEO and president of the American Association of People with Disabilities. We worked together. We were both on the board of directors at the Independence Center of Northern Virginia, and that's where we got to know each other. After Helena retired from the American Association of People with Disabilities, she and I started talking about the need to start a REVUp Virginia chapter. And REVUp stands for Register, Educate, Vote, and Use the Power of the Disability Vote. We're a nonpartisan voter education and engagement initiative aimed at increasing the power and the influence of the disability vote to help effectuate meaningful change in the lives of disabled Virginians and their families. The statewide Disability Voting Coalition launched in April of 2021, is composed of interested individuals and representatives from diverse disability organizations and allied groups who are working collectively to advance the disability vote in the Commonwealth. REVUp Virginia is part of the national REVUp campaign coordinated by the American Association of People with Disabilities. Our activities include, but are not limited to, educating voters, election officials, candidates, participating in National Disability Voter Registration Week, which will be September 12th through 16th this year, organizing local and statewide candidate forums, developing candidate surveys, improving polling place and voting machine accessibility, building strategic partnerships with state and local officials, and working to eradicate systemic barriers to voting, including protecting the rights of all disabled Virginians. REVUp has been very pleased to have the Virginia State League of Women Voters engaged in our coalition. We're beginning to engage with other statewide organizations such as the National NAACP. We are working with ARC of Northern Virginia, various independence centers across the state, and working to increase the diversity and engagement of people with disabilities. So that's REVUp Virginia. May I go ahead? Would you like me to go ahead and speak about the issue today, Deb? Okay. Okay. So when Joan approached us about speaking about the requirement of the witness signature, Helena and I did some research and began to look at what has been published on the issue of witness signature. That includes your own case that you brought against the Virginia Board of Elections back in April of 2020. We looked at the American Bar Association's paper on the absentee voting and the disability vote integrity. In that paper was done in 2007. And then we took a look at the 2021 paper by Schur and Cruz, Disability and Voting Accessibility in the 2020 Elections. That was the final report on the survey results submitted to the Election Assistance Commission. Schur and Cruz are really the real experts on disability voting, and they're at Rutgers University. So we took a look at those papers. Following that, did sort of a very short qualitative, non-scientific qualitative analysis, because we only had a couple weeks to work on this. Reached out to our list of attendees from our September 13th REVUp Virginia event that we had with the Commissioner of Elections, Christopher Piper. We also reached out and sent emails out to our listserv for REVUp Virginia, asking people for their comments on the impact of the the witness signature requirement on persons with disability voting, either themselves or others. And then following that, I also did individual unstructured interviews with a number of people, including a advocate speech pathologist who works with people with hearing and hearing impairment and deafness, and does essentially American Sign Language communications, regular communications with adults in Northern Virginia who are deaf. And then spoke with Dr. Andrew Guccione, who is the previous chair of the Rehab Science Department, a longtime physical therapist, worldwide expert on disability, particularly mobility disabilities, spinal cord injuries, arthritis, but also across the board, really. But mobilities are his primary publications. Also spoke with two individuals who had visual impairment or blindness, one individual who was a caregiver for a person with MS, another caregiver of a person with dementia, and then finally a adult with anxiety, depression, and talked to all those people about the impact of the witness requirement. The witness signature requirement. What I found and concluded is that the witness signature requirement seems to have the biggest negative impact on persons with visual impairments and cognitive disabilities. that was sort of shown through the American Bar Association literature, as well as the shore and cruise survey from 2020. It was repeated in the various interviews that we did with people with visual impairments and blindness, and then also by people with cognitive impairments. So that seems to be the strongest impact on those particular groups of people within disabilities. Across the board, of course, we have a higher incidence of people with disabilities who live alone than others, than the general population. 25% of those 18 and above in the Commonwealth at large live alone, according to the census, where 37% of those 18 and above with a disability live alone, and 44% of those who are 65 and older with a disability live alone. So as we can see, quarter of the population lives alone, but third to almost a half of the disability population lives alone of the adult voting age population. That being said, the impact on their voting experience seems to be threefold. One, of course, as we've all talked about, and why the League brought the case against the state of Virginia during the pandemic, was just the safety of bringing a witness into your home during a pandemic. I myself experienced an issue with that, having to get a witness for my dear friend who has COPD and stage 4 lung cancer, having to get a signature, a witness signature on another sort of a legal document during the pandemic, and the logistics of that, trying to find a time when she felt well enough to have somebody come in to the home, to arrange people that we knew were going to be safe to come into the home, that were not that were less likely to be exposed to the COVID virus. And so just the logistics of that were difficult, and it fell upon me as a caregiver from my friend really to do that. So I fully appreciate the difficulty of that. So that's the safety issue. And so that burden, of course, falls more heavily on the disability community, because people don't have someone else in their household who they can rely on to be that witness for their signature. The second issue is so that's just of course, the safety, and then the logistics of that. So there's two issues there. And then third is just this feeling of the secrecy and independence of voting when you need a witness. And when I first was approached with this question, I thought, well, the witness doesn't really need to see you complete your ballot, so how much of an issue is it? But then when I read the actual requirements in the Virginia Code, it says, when voters receive their mailed absentee ballots, they shall, in the presence of a witness, open the sealed envelope marked ballot within, mark and refold the ballot without assistance and without indicating how they mark the ballot. Once they fill it in, they shall enclose the ballot in the envelope provided for that purpose, seal the envelope, fill in and sign the statement printed on the back of the envelope in the presence of the witness who shall sign the same envelope, and then on and on. And as I was reading that, I was really starting to think about the potential for coercion and intimidation that people could feel, especially as heated as politics are and as partisan as politics have become. I was thinking particularly, and it really didn't come up a lot well, it did come up in the American Bar Association paper that people in nursing homes particularly feel at risk for coercion and intimidation. So that's a further issue. So in any case, there certainly seems to be particularly the impact on people with visual impairments and cognitive impairments in terms of figuring out the logistics of all of that, and the fact that a person who can't see can't tell if somebody's looking over their shoulder and seeing their ballot. And then people with cognitive difficulties is just sort of sorting all that stuff out. Just the process of reading all of that material, and then having a person having to organize and coordinate, having a witness there if you don't live with someone. So I think those are the things that I found, and I think certainly, given all of that, my feeling is that REVUp Virginia would be likely to want to support such legislation as to do away with the witness signature requirement. I can't speak for REVUp Virginia, but given the number of people from the League of Women Voters that are participating and our overall discussion last week, I would think that REVUp Virginia would want to support that.
Thanks so much, Susan. Joan, do we have any questions in the chat?
We do, but I think you just answered it. Someone wanted some more information about why those two groups suffered more than others, comparatively. And I think you just did answer that in your last statement.
Okay.
So perfect.
Great.
Susan, thank you so much. And we appreciate your advocacy, your partnership, and we really look forward to continuing to work with you to help voters of different abilities. So thank you so much.
Thank you for this opportunity, Deb.
Thank you.
And Joan.
Delegate Vivian Watts is in the room, and let's give her just a few minutes before we move to Senator Surovell. So welcome, Delegate Watts.
Good morning and thank you. I'm so glad that we do have the laptop here at the podium, because I was thinking the one thing I miss about everything virtual is that you just don't see the body reactions of folks as you are speaking. And it's very, very interesting, particularly, and I decided once again, although I tried to slip it in last week, I want to still stay with the issues of taxes that are going to be so dominant in this General Assembly session and are going to set the path for so much in our future of the Commonwealth. And this is why, again, seeing who's nodding off would have been very helpful to me, because I'm very used to being a nerd and boring about taxes. And that certainly, and again, I don't mean to just pander in any way, that was where I started with the League of Women Voters. I'm a numbers person at heart, and I knew every good program that we worked on, ultimately, could we afford it? So I'm going to go again down the litany of what we were dealing with. When I was cabinet secretary, I had public safety as well as transportation. In those years, recruitment classes for the state police, commonly, you had more than high school education, frequently 2 years of post-high school education. Now recruits have a GED. And not even the work experience that one would expect that might help mitigate that lack of broader education and concern about issues that we would expect. I've said it before, one of the problems with our state facilities in mental health is that if a distribution center for Amazon opens up, we lose floor workforce to much better working conditions, to safer working conditions. I double checked this during the campaign that yes, Virginia's teacher salaries compared to the other salaries in the state are the lowest in the nation. And that compared to other salaries in the state is a very important measure because it balances out for looking at states like Utah and states like Arizona and Alaska, Maine. We are the lowest in the nation. We are not competitive. And yet we are talking about major ongoing forever tax cuts because we have a current surplus that is made up very significantly of federal funds, but also made up because it has been so extremely difficult to predict what the workforce is in cases of COVID with all of the remote work that we have. We have not lost the income that was expected in many jobs, and those tend to be the higher income jobs, besides the fact that, quite frankly, the stock market has gone crazy in the last couple of years, and that has also brought in significant revenue that once there is an opportunity for some of the money that is in the stock market to invest in other areas, particularly related to the infrastructure that improvements that are long overdue, we will see a shift of money out of the stock market and money that we have been getting then on non-payroll deductions, which includes then the capital gains money. All of those things are in tremendous flux. So to make the decisions that we are going to make major cuts in revenues, we have bills before us that will reduce the corporate income tax from 6% down to 2% without the documentation that that's needed at all. That of course, we've all heard about removing the tax on food, but the problem there is the reason we still have 2.5 cents on food is that despite our efforts over decades to take that tax off food, the dedication of the tax, 1% directly back to localities based on school age population, 1% local revenue, which in many localities, at least half of that, again, is all K through 12 support, as well as the 0.5 cent on transportation, which is then combined with the proposal that we suspend our most recent tax increase on transportation, which was put into place because of fuel efficient vehicles. We finally had reached that crossover point where vehicle miles traveled were in fact going up faster than revenue. And they had crossed over where we were losing revenue despite the vehicle miles traveled and the need going up, despite the fact that that increase goes more than half to maintenance, which is, yes, snow removal, as well as a state of good repair on roads throughout the Commonwealth, from subdivisions to entrance ramps to interstates and the interstates themselves. I lay out all of these needs because they represent a wellspring of needs that must be addressed with ongoing revenue, not one-shotters, ongoing revenue, both at the state as well as the local level, and making sure that we all understand what is at stake. Because once these tax cuts are made, I'll conclude by saying I've been forever on the House Finance Committee, which is the tax writing committee. And I've seen the influence of the no tax pledge, Grover Norquist. And Grover Norquist's interpretation of no tax increase means no tax reform. Because by definition, if you are going to address these ongoing revenue needs, and we must balance our budget, you can't reduce a tax unless you're going to balance it with a more equitable tax. And this is the dialogue that I desperately fear that we're not having in what is basically a bumper sticker approach to just say no. So thank you so much for letting me do that little primer, and hopefully you're all still awake. Thank you.
Senator Surovell is here. Someone wants you to please repeat the statistic on our teachers' salaries being the lowest in the nation. What was that statistic?
The statistic is that compared to salaries in Virginia, So it's always relative, which then adjusts for cost of living, marketplace, and all that sort of thing. Compared to salaries in Virginia, we have the lowest teacher salaries of any state. And I checked that out independently when it was said, and also there was a major look at it by PolitiFact.
Thank you.
Delegate Watts, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We always appreciate your support and knowledge, and I don't think anybody is sleeping, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, we'd like to welcome Senator Surovell. Senator Surovell has long been a champion of women and particularly was a fierce champion for the ERA in Virginia, and we truly appreciate his support in that. Welcome, Senator Surovell.
Folks, and it's always good to be with the League of Women Voters. My grandmother was a longtime member, and you all do a lot of good work raising awareness about issues. I always enjoy your forums during campaigns and stuff. And it's always an honor to follow the longest serving woman in the history of the House of Delegates, Vivian Watts. So I think you all wanted me to talk about the witness requirement on the absentee ballot envelope. When I logged in, I heard some chatter about that as well. We actually had that bill up in the Privileges and Elections Committee yesterday. Senator Eben took it by for the week because there were some questions raised about his proposed alternative to, putting your signature down. He wanted you to put your birthday or your the last four of your social, and there were concerns that that could jeopardize people's personal information. It was carried by for the week. I'm not terribly worried about that in terms of its passage in both either the Privileges and Elections Committee or the full Senate. I am worried the bill will pass the House, but from my perspective, usually when these signatures are left off an envelope, it's usually an omission. It's not intentional. In fact, I caught my wife, almost putting hers in the envelope without putting my signature on the envelope when she and I were doing our ballots the other day. So it's a really easy, last election, it's a really easy thing to miss. So, but I'm hopeful that we can, I think we'll get through the Senate, but the House, I'm not optimistic about. I'm not sure if you all watched our committee hearing yesterday, but we rejected several bills, which I thought were very hostile to facilitating voting. Senator Obenshain had a bill to reinstate the mandatory voter ID requirement as opposed to the voter ID requirement we have right now, which I think works fine and worked for decades before we changed the law back in whenever it was 2017 or 18. We also had a bill to eliminate same-day voter registration, which is about to take effect. We killed that. What else did we kill? We killed something else yesterday, which I can go look up. But, I thought we'd sort of settled these fights, and now we're still having them again and again and again and again. And I suspect we'll see the same bills coming over from the House again as well. We also did pass the Senator Locke's constitutional amendment, which would remove our Jim Crow era language from the Constitution that automatically gets rid of people's voting rights and requires a gubernatorial restoration. And then puts an affirmative right to vote in the Constitution. Right now, the Constitution of Virginia does not contain an affirmative right to vote. And the only mention actually of a right to vote in any constitution is the 15th Amendment mentions it a little bit, but there's no federal or state right to vote that's really clearly stated anywhere, and this would change that. I'm not worried about, again, passing the Senate. I am worried about it passing the House, but in one glimmer of hope is that there is a Republican state delegate who introduced the exact same amendment in on the House side. I don't know if he's on the Privileges and Elections Committee, but that at least I think would give us one extra vote on the floor. In order to get something passed, we actually need three Republicans to cross over to pass that if it gets out of committee. But so there is a glimmer of hope in the House. We'll see if the speaker is okay. I mean, from my perspective, getting rid of this Jim Crow era language and putting the right to vote in the Constitution shouldn't be a very controversial, because I think most people think they have a right to vote, and most people don't like Jim Crow, but for some reason, these things get controversial, right? So we'll see where that goes. So we did a couple other things yesterday, some of which have mingling forms of controversy on voting. One is we passed a law out of the Senate P&E committee to require constitutional officers to have their party ID on the ballot. So right now, Commonwealth attorneys, sheriffs, clerks of court, commissioners of revenue, treasurers don't have their party identification listed. If this bill passes, that will change. We also, what else did we do? There was another bill we shot down, which I can't
Was
find.
it voter same-day voter registration to try to kill that?
Yeah, I already mentioned that. We shot that down. There was another one that required verification of social security numbers. We shot that down.
Right.
Terry McAuliffe vetoed that twice back in 17 and 18. And then there was a couple other bills that had sort of a little bit of intrigue associated with them. Senator Peterson had a bill that would prohibit organizations from publishing your voting history on a mailer. There were a lot of people that are angry because my daughter got one of these. It said she got like a D for her voting history. My daughter's actually voted in every single election since she's in college right now. And she's voted in every single election, every primary since she got registered to vote, and they gave her a D. And then they put all my neighbors up and said, here's all your neighbors who vote more than you do. Anyway, a lot of people in Virginia got these things, and people got really angry. We all got a lot of emails about it. Yeah, there's one. We also passed the Senator Evans amendment to take the anti-gay marriage language out of our Virginia Declaration of Rights and replace it with a right to marry. That we also passed at a committee. One other thing we passed, which actually it's kind of significant, but nobody in the media picked it up. Senator Vogel carried a bill. You know, she was the chairman of the Privileges and Elections Committee before the switchover, but she carried a bill that would change the State Board of Elections to a four. Actually, maybe we carried that over. I think we might have carried it over, but she wants to change the Board of Elections to a 4 Democrat, 4 Republican board to make it a truly nonpartisan agency, so that when you have a new governor that comes in, he's not able to appoint a majority of that board, so that we have an elections board that's truly free of politics. And we had some questions about that, and she carried it over a week, I think, so we could talk about it some more. But I think there's support for that, but we'll see. Some people have a bad taste in their mouth from the stalemate that happened on redistricting, and concerned that if we have a 4-4 board, it'll just stalemate every time without a tie break. And so we debated that a little bit, and I think we decided to carry that over to next week. So we actually had a pretty eventful hearing yesterday. We took up about, I think, 30 bills and carried a few over to next week. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we did, but I'm not seeing anything else. Happy to take any questions you got.
Yeah, Senator, we do have a couple on this 4-4 board, and there was a question about the equality, but someone also raised the question, what about independents? You have 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats. What about people who have no party affiliation being represented? Was that brought up?
No, it wasn't. America is kind of a duopoly system, at least according to the code and federal law. FEC kind of functions the same way. And, polling would say otherwise. Polling, I would think, probably shows the majority of Americans probably consider themselves to be independent, even though they tend to vote a certain way every time. But no, we didn't have any. There was nothing there, and there's not a lot of things are so partisan today. I'm not sure if we had a spot for an independent, whether you could really find an independent that was really truly independent. So it's that didn't come up.
And there was a question about, again, going back to the same-day voter reg, that will go into effect if it's not killed. Do you know of any preparations to implement that across Virginia? Have you heard of how they're going to set this up?
It didn't come up on it didn't come up in the hearing yesterday. I don't remember it coming up. But I can only assume that they're in process of implementing it. I mean, it obviously creates a whole new bunch of new training that has to happen so that our polling place workers understand how to deal with it when it happens. And so I can only assume that the forms are being changed and that the Department of Elections is preparing training materials and all that for the local electoral boards to be able to deal with it when the time comes. But it didn't come up in hearing, and I haven't had a conversation with the Board of Elections, but given that it's supposed to go live, I think this year. So they should be deep in the middle of that, I would think. Trying to look up and see when it's effective, but I thought it was this year.
It's October. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that was Hala Ala's bill in 2020. October 1, 2022 is in the, I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah. I don't have any more questions here, Deb. I don't know if you have any in the room.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And Delegate Hudson just entered the room. So I just want to interject that as an election officer, I often think about what laws would most help the voters that had issues that day. And same-day voter registration is the one that keeps coming up. And this last election, we had a lot of 18-year-olds who had registered and were not showing up in the system and had to cast a provisional ballot. And I really think same-day voter registration would help a lot of people. So thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for updating us on all of the events from yesterday's very long and but very important Senate P&E meeting. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for asking me to come by, and always good to see my former constituent and returning constituent. Thanks to redistricting Arena Van Breda on the call. So see y'all later.
Thank you.
In the room with us now is, we're being recorded? Oh, in the room now is Delegate Sally Hudson. And Delegate Hudson has been a great proponent of voting and good governance. And I will let you take it away.
Well, thanks very much, everyone, for having me with you this morning. It's great to see you, although I wish we could be together in person. For those of you who I haven't had the good fortune to meet before, my name is Sally Hudson, and I serve Charlottesville and Albemarle County in the House of Delegates. In my day job, I teach economics at the University of Virginia, but am thrilled to be back in Richmond for the General Assembly session and see some familiar faces and hopefully some new folks I'll get to know better in the days ahead. I think that I have been charged with talking about absentee ballot witness requirements, though I gather, Joan, you just did a thorough rundown on the Senate P&E meeting from yesterday.
Well, no, the senator did that.
Okay. Well, excellent. Then you were talking to the best. It sounds like then you understand that we're counting on Senate P&E to be a brick wall for all sorts of bad things that are going to come flying out of the House. And I'm afraid that on that list is a bill to strengthen the absentee ballot witness requirement, not to get rid of it, but rather to add more information on the part of the witness, not just their signature, things, additional demographic details and social security numbers and that. That has nothing to do with increasing the reliability of witness signatures for voting ballots, and everything to do with increasing the likelihood that somebody screws up somewhere and the ballot can be rejected. As you know, this is not about election integrity. It's about just making it more of a hassle to vote. And so, of course, those of us who care deeply about the witness requirement in particular and about voter access and making it easy as possible for as many people as possible to have their vote heard should be deeply opposed to this. It's theater at best. as far as I'm concerned. It's just about adding one more bill to the list of things that sounds like making our elections safer, but is really about keeping more people out of the process. It's also a very wasteful endeavor because it means that lots of people get tied up in the process of ballot curing and rejection. And there are much better ways that those of us who care about democracy could be spending our time than trying to jump through all these hoops and hurdles. And of course, I think all of us know that all of that would have been true 2 years ago when I was first being sworn in, but it's especially true now in a time where we understand that the witness requirement is an extra hurdle when we have major public health concerns, when there are lots of people who are living alone or are sheltering in place, for whom finding someone who they can safely have sign their ballot is an extra heavy lift. It's a meaningful barrier to their ballot access, especially for older voters, especially for voters who may have certain health conditions that make it less safe for them to go to their polling place, where being able to vote from home was a big part of them being able to have their voice heard while staying safe. So I'm seeing in the chat actually at this moment a great example of exactly why we don't want to move in the direction of these bigger ballot access hurdles, which is that Texas has passed a series of these bigger burden laws and is now rejecting an outrageous share of the absentee ballots that have been cast for all sorts of absurd and Byzantine rules. One of them happens to be that if you registered to vote absentee with, say, your driver's license number, and then the form of identification that you provide on the ballot is your social security number, then your ballot would be rejected for inconsistency, because they expect you to remember to provide the same identifying information that you did when you registered at the time that you cast your ballot. I think this one is fairly straightforward, especially for a group that is as deeply steeped in this stuff as you are. So I won't belabor the point, but I'm very happy to address any questions or have a discussion with the time we have left.
Well, we actually have a question on economics.
Oh, okay.
Well, Delegate Watts was here just a few minutes before you, and she talked about tax cuts. So someone is asking, as a teacher of economics, what do you think of the tax cuts based on the current surplus?
It's a good question. And as a card-carrying economist, I am required to say that the answer is complicated, in part because there is some goodness in the specific tax cuts that are being proposed. I would love to get rid of the grocery tax as a regressive measure that is a bigger burden on working families. But I also know that those sales taxes are some of the primary sources of revenue for essential public services for both state and local government, for our public schools, for our first responders. And so while I am aligned with Delegate Watts in being in favor of a major restructuring of our tax code that would put less emphasis on those burdensome regressive taxes and more of an emphasis on income and wealth taxes that help people pay their fair share in accordance with their ability to do so. I think that that's what's going to be challenging as the General Assembly attacks this discussion in the days ahead, is that we've got lots of people who are deeply supportive of making our tax code less regressive, while at the same time recognizing that our public services are in desperate need of more support, not less. I talk every day with people working in the most critical professions that have been keeping us all safe and healthy over the last couple of years, whether it's our teachers or our behavioral health professionals, our home health aides, our foster care workers. There's not a state employee that I can think of who hasn't felt overstretched and underpaid over the last few years. And so we've got a lot of work to do to shore up public services in Virginia, and it's hard to do that while cutting taxes at the same time. So if we're talking about a wholesale overhaul of the tax code that included making our income tax more progressive, then I would be greatly supportive of taking more of the emphasis off of sales and grocery taxes. But that money's got to come from somewhere if we're going to keep doing right by the public services that we have promised Virginians.
There is a question back to voting on ranked choice voting.
Great.
I'd like to know about the ranked choice voting and particularly your reason for dropping the bill this year.
Sure. So those of you who have met me before know this is an issue near and dear to my heart, and I'm very excited that the league continues to be interested in this ongoing conversation. There are 2 ranked choice voting bills before the General Assembly this year. One of them is mine, which is about expanding ranked choice voting at the local level. And there's another on which I'm the chief co-patron with Delegate Glenn Davis, which is about expanding ranked choice voting to party primaries across the board in Virginia, from state level offices on up to the president. And I think it's part of a broader bipartisan movement to support ranked choice ballots as a really practical solution to a good problem that both parties have, which is that we have a lot of energy. We have more candidates stepping up to run for office in Virginia than ever before. I think in total last year, there were 31, I think, total statewide candidates for statewide or for office between the 2 parties, between the Republicans and the Democrats, Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor. That's a lot of choices, and that's good for democracy. I think voters are in a good position when they have real choices on the ballot between people who are offering different perspectives. But right now, our ballots just aren't built to handle elections with that many candidates running. I think we've all had the experience of walking into our polling place and feeling a bit torn between choosing the person who really matches our values, who might be voting our conscience, and choosing the person who we think can win, and not wanting to waste a vote on someone who might not still really be in the running. And that's the problem that ranked choice solves. In a ranked choice election, you get to vote for all the candidates in the order that you like them, so that if your favorite candidate turns out not to be a front runner, your ballot can still be counted in the instant runoff process that determines the final winner who has majority support. And at this point, both parties have had success using ranked choice voting in Virginia. Saw the Republicans use it in their statewide convention last year, and Democrats have used it at the local level in party primaries as well, in Charlottesville, where I serve, and in Arlington County. And so now I think that there's a growing bipartisan movement around this because both parties recognize the benefits. And so there are 2 bills before the legislature this year. One of them is a smaller bill, it's mine, which would expand a bill I carried a couple years ago that authorized ranked choice for the first time in Virginia at the local level. But at that time, we restricted it to city councils and county boards as a first step. And we got feedback from the county of Arlington that as they're considering making this switch, they kind of think they'd like to do it all at once and do county board and school board at the same time. And so that's why I dropped this particular bill this year, is that it's making all local election offices ranked choice if the county wants to at the same time, so their ballots can be consistent top to bottom. And then the bigger bill is important because right now our state law allows the Republican Party, for example, to use ranked choice in their convention like they did last year, but only in one of those party-run conventions. They can't do ranked choice yet in a state-run primary with all the state's election equipment and polling places and staff. And so that meant that they were left with the unfortunate duty of counting the ballots by hand. And that's just not necessary in our modern era. You know, most of our election equipment comes ranked choice capable from the start. And so we need to update our laws so that the communities and the parties that are interested in conducting ranked choice primaries can use the equipment they already own and do it in a more professional and frankly, election integrity friendly sort of way than just counting ballots in a hotel somewhere.
Do you have the bill numbers by any chance?
I think that this bill that I'm carrying is 603, and I don't remember Delegate Davis's bill off the top of my head, but it is one that he's the chief co-patron of, and he's the chief patron and I'm the chief co-patron.
Okay, I'll look it up for them. One of the things about ranked choice, that being in Arlington, where we are one party, we learned that it actually opens it up to people who are not anointed by the party. And I don't think a lot of people realize that about ranked choice, and how good that is. Oh, Arena says it's HB 129 is thanks, Arena. And there's Jane Newell ahead of me, so both of them putting 129. But we had an election here, and the person was anointed by the party, and they didn't win because of ranked choice. And it was great you know, for people who are less so well known. But I really think that's a selling point of ranked choice that the parties obviously don't want to talk about. But I think for us, when we're trying to get everybody involved in the process, it is very helpful.
I think there's another dimension on that note, which is really valuable for people who just want there to be more engaged civic discourse, which is that when localities move to a ranked choice general election, they often dispense with their party primaries altogether. So they no longer, I also live in a community that is very one party. And what we have, as you described, is a primary from January to June, and then a coronation in November. And that is a long and kind of exhausting process for the electorate, which is usually just coming off the heels of a federal election. And so if you get rid of the party primaries and you move to a ranked choice general, then you can run what feels like a more humane election cycle for a little school board seat or a city council seat, which is people can declare by the summer before the election and then run for 4 or 5 months while they're talking to their neighbors instead of stretching it out over this 11th-month period, which I think really advantages insiders who are deeply familiar with the political process and know that it starts that early and that they have to pass through this partisan gate. So if we're invested in making more people feel like local elected office is a good fit for them, then I think it's all to the good.
We do have a comment about the Alaska experiment with ranked choice. And I would also suggest people look at Maine. The League of Women Voters of Maine was instrumental in getting ranked choice voting in.
Absolutely. And Utah now, they carried a bill very much like the one that I had 3 years back. And now they've had dozens of cities adopt it because they're in a similar situation where they have sort of a lot of one party leaning communities that were looking for a way to run more practical and diverse elections. I think the biggest test for ranked choice came in the last year when New York City used ranked choice voting for its city council and mayoral elections. And since I'm talking to the League of Women Voters, I feel compelled to bring that up because for the first time in New York history, they will have a majority women city council. It's a 51-member body that went from 18 women to 29.
Wow.
Because ranked choice elections tend to advantage candidates who can build coalitions between diverse groups, which is also why we shouldn't be surprised that 26 of those 29 women are women of color. So they have lots of first-generation immigrants, lots of Latina candidates, lots of Black candidates, lots of Asian Americans. For a city as diverse as New York, I think that their first experience with ranked choice has finally let their city council look more like the people they serve.
Great. Deb, I'm not seeing anything else in chat.
Wonderful.
Delegate Hudson, thank you so much. And I have also appreciated on Twitter your education to your students and to the public about COVID and the importance of being safe and wearing masks. So thank you so much for your service to the community and also to us. So
Thank you.
And
Always
welcome.
good to be with you.
So we are wrapping up here. I would like to remind everybody that next Wednesday is our big hoop-de-doo. It's League Day. And we invite you, love having you with us virtually, but would love to have you here with us in person next week so that you can visit with your legislators and remind you to reach out to your local league presidents to set those constituent meetings up. If you need help, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help you, especially if you're a member at large. And if you are nervous that no one from your league is coming and you still want to meet, just reach out and we will hook you up. Perhaps I'll go with you. So that personal touch, though, with your legislator as a constituent is so important. You will also be representing the league next week, which is a little bit different, but we do want the legislature to know that the league is in the House. We will also be in the Senate. So we will be recognized on the floor of both chambers at the start of the floor session that starts at noon. So do come and join us next week in person, or if you're not able to, please join us virtually as well. It'll be a longer day next week because it's League Day. So we will go until 11, Joan? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so from 8:30 to 11 next week, and then we'll head over to the across the street. There was a queue starting when I arrived this morning at 8 a.m. So keep that in mind, that there may be a bit of a wait to get inside the Pocahontas building next week. And I haven't looked up the hill to see what the line is like at the Capitol, but build that into your plans. Please come. We are focused next week. Excuse me, Joan, what is our topic next week?
Access to voting for all.
Okay, access to voting for all. We have some great speakers lined up. Thank you, and watch for those action alerts. We started to craft those, and get ready to contact your legislators as voters.
And the galleries are open, correct? There's a question.
Yes, yes, the galleries are open. So and you must wear a mask. So all right, thanks, and have a great day.